Hey guys, tonight we travel all the way back to an ancient myth so ridiculous, so ugly petty, that it somehow kicked off one of the most famous wars in Western literature. You're at a divine wedding. There are glowing goddesses, thunderous toasts, and peacocks strutting around like they own the place. The music probably played on invisible lyres by celestial beings who don't even need tips. The food, golden apples, ambrosia, and wine that refills itself. And you're just sort of there, floating on the edge of it all, draped in a toga you didn't choose, trying not to sneeze too loud because, Hera's in the room and she holds grudges. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're still awake, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? And what time is it there? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're surrounded by gods and goddesses, all glittering and dramatic, at what might be the single worst wedding guest list ever assembled. It's the marriage of Peleus, a mortal, and Thetis, a sea goddess who shape-shifted into a literal flame to avoid marrying him. Romance. Zeus himself arranged this little nuptial disaster, mostly to prevent a prophecy from ruining his whole celestial vibe. Thetis, you see, was destined to bear a son greater than his father, so obviously Zeus didn't want that son to be his. Instead, he marries her off to a random Greek guy and throws a divine party. Everyone's their Apollo, throwing sun-kissed glances around like a prom king, Artemis. Side-eyeing the meat trays, Dionysus, already halfway into his fourth goblet. It's one of those mythological nights where everything sparkles, and nothing could possibly go wrong. Except, of course, one goddess didn't get an invite. Enter Eris, goddess of discord and certified chaos agent. She's not just uninvited, she's intentionally not invited, which, as you might guess, doesn't sit well with someone whose entire brand is starting drama. She doesn't scream. She doesn't stomp. She does something far worse. She tosses a golden apple onto the banquet table, like she's in a reality show and just dropped a glitter bomb. The apple gleams unnaturally bright. Inscribed on it, in classic mean girl energy, are the words, "To the fairest." You watch as silence crashes over the wedding like a falling amphora. Three goddesses turn to stare at that apple. Hera, queen of the gods. Athena, goddess of wisdom and war. And Aphrodite, goddess of love and mid-century sculpture poses. Each one knows the apple belongs to her. None of them budge. Tension thickens the air like too much incense. You try to slink away, but it's already too late. The goddesses are glaring at each other like co-workers during a budget meeting. Zeus, trying to dodge the emotional minefield, does what all good leaders do, he delegates. So, he picks a human to judge the fairest contest. A mortal, because what's better than placing the fate of the cosmos in the hands of a guy who still struggles to tie his sandals? Historians still argue whether Eris was meant to represent genuine strife, or if she's just the personification of every group chat argument that ever escalated. But in Greek storytelling, she's the pebble that starts the avalanche. That single apple, hurled with just the right amount of sass, begins the long tumble toward one of the most over-the-top wars ever imagined. What's wild is that the apple itself wasn't cursed, magical, or explosive, just pointed, passive-aggressive enough to destroy cities. If you've ever seen someone write per my last email and cause a 3-day workplace meltdown, you get the vibe. You shift now to Olympus, the air thinner, colder, and oddly judgmental. The golden apple has made its way up the divine chain of command, and the three goddesses Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite are not letting this go, period. Like, ever. They're not shouting yet, but you can hear the strain in their voices, like someone about to accidentally knock over a co-worker's coffee mug. Zeus, as usual, wants no part of this, period. The king of the gods is many things, thunder-wielding, shape-shifting, eternally unfaithful but wise. Not exactly. He knows better than to declare one of these three the fairest, period. That's how you end up with lightning bolts in your pillow. So he punts the decision down to earth. Enter Paris. Paris is a Trojan prince, but not the important, throne-sitting kind, period. He is more like the sent away to avoid a prophecy type. His father, King Priam, had a bad dream once that baby Paris would destroy Troy. So naturally, they sent the kid to be raised by shepherds in the countryside, period. Classic royal parenting. You've got to love how every myth starts with we tried to avoid destiny and ends with whoops. Destiny happened anyway. Now grown, Paris is minding his own business, period. They arrive not with thunder, but with a kind of simmering glow. Hera, regally stiff, looks like she's ready to file a formal complaint. Athena scans the area like a war general checking for tactical advantages, period. Aphrodite, she's lounging, somehow reclining midair, already playing her eyelashes like castanets. They don't even introduce themselves nicely. This isn't a meet cute, it's a celestial ambush, period. They plop the golden apple down in front of Paris and go, you choose. Now imagine being this guy. One moment you're herding sheep, trying to find your lost sandal, period. The next, three eternal forces of nature are asking you to rank them by beauty on the spot. Historians still argue whether this scene symbolizes divine interference in mortal affairs, or just ancient Greek obsession with looks, period. Either way, Paris is stuck, naturally. The goddesses don't play fair. First comes Hera. She's got this queenly calm, the kind that makes your spine straighten even if you're slouching in bed, period. She leans in like she's sharing a secret from a textbook. Wisdom, military genius. Victory in every battle, real battlefield success. With me, she says, you'll never lose. Even in arguments with your in-laws, period. Okay, maybe not the last part, but she's dangling strategy and supremacy. The kind of stuff philosophers and generals dream about. Then comes Aphrodite. And here's where everything unravels, period. Aphrodite knows her audience. Paris is a young man, dreamy, poetic, definitely the type to write bad poetry under a tree. She offers not empires, not wisdom, but love, period. The love of the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen of Sparta. Married Helen? Oops. No war, no thrones, no philosophy, just forbidden romance with someone so stunning. Poets will run out of adjectives for her cheekbones, period. Aphrodite doesn't just promise beauty, she promises the fantasy. And for Paris, that's all it takes. He picks Aphrodite, no dramatic ceremony, no confetti cannon, period. Just the soft sound of destiny clicking into place like a trapdoor. He hands her the apple. And the other to goddesses. They do not take it well. Hera looks like she's planning a 1,000-year revenge plan, period. He thinks he's won. He thinks this is about love. But you, hovering quietly beside him, know better. You know that by choosing Aphrodite, Paris didn't just insult the goddesses, period. He picked a side in a cosmic grudge match. The kind that doesn't end in unfollows, it ends in fire and spear tips. A quirky little detail. Some older versions of the myth hint that Hermes was there too, period. Acting as celestial MC for the beauty contest. He didn't compete, he just handed out apples and tried not to laugh too hard. When Paris made his pick, from the Olympian's perspective, Paris is a nobody, period. But now, he's got their attention. He is a chess piece that just became a king or a pawn destined to get knocked over dramatically. 3 moves later, you glance up at the sky, which now carries a faint, tense shimmer, period. The goddesses are gone. Paris is pacing, trying to imagine what it means to win Helen. You can already hear the distant strings of trouble tightening, and somewhere far across the Aegean, Helen of Sparta is brushing her hair by torchlight, period. Unaware that a stranger with shepherd hair and a golden apple is about to rewrite her life. You drift now across the sea. Soft waves lapping beneath you like the breath of a sleeping giant. The landscape changes. The dry hills of Troy giving way to the polished marble and manicured beauty of Sparta, period. Sunlight filters down onto tall columns and olive groves. And there, in a palace bright with gold and intrigue, lives Helen. Helen of Sparta. Yes, that Helen. You've probably heard she launched 1,000 ships. Period. You've probably also heard some less flattering things. But here, as you hover in the cool morning air, she's just a woman brushing her hair, utterly unaware that the universe has placed a red target on her back. Period. And no, she didn't ask for any of this. Helen isn't just any queen. She's said to be the daughter of Zeus himself, born from one of his more questionable adventures, involving a swan. Period. Ancient mythology, weirdly obsessed with birds. She's been the subject of legend since her cradle. Kings travel from across Greece to woo her. In fact, her stepfather, King Tyndareus, made all the suitors swear a sacred oath. Period. To protect her marriage, no matter who won her hand. She chose Menelaus, brother of the powerful King Agamemnon. And so, Helen became Queen of Sparta. You'd think that would be the end of her story. Period. With the confident swagger of someone who just won the celestial lottery, Aphrodite has pulled some strings, softened the weather, maybe whispered in the ears of some palace guards. You land beside him. Period. As he enters the Spartan palace with a diplomatic smile and clothes that try very hard not to smell like sheep. Menelaus is away, because of course he is. Some royal business. Period. Maybe he's inspecting ships. Maybe he's just really bad at timing. Either way, Paris finds himself alone with Helen and Aphrodite. She's working overtime. Now here's where things get complicated. Period. And historians still argue whether Helen truly fell in love with Paris, or whether Aphrodite simply enchanted her. Some versions say she was swept away by passion. Others insist she was practically kidnapped. Period. And then there's the fringe theory that Helen never went to Troy at all, that it was a phantom or illusion in her place, while the real Helen hid in Egypt sipping pomegranate wine. Sleepy mystery, anyone, period. Or maybe more truthfully, she lets herself be taken. That night, the two of them slip away like mist. Helen leaves behind her crown, her daughter, and her oath-bound husband. Period. She boards Paris' ship, not knowing she's dragging behind her the fury of 10,000 warriors. You hover near the sails, watching Sparta vanish in the distance. The stars overhead are so quiet. Period. You'd think this was a love story, but the sea knows better. The sea remembers every time a prince follows lust into war. Back in Sparta, Menelaus returns. He's barely stepped into the palace. Period. Before the whispers reach him, servants avoiding his gaze, doors mysteriously ajar. And then, her absence, her sandals still by the bed, her mirror still warm from use. His grief is swift. Period. But his anger, that's volcanic. Menelaus doesn't just want his wife back, he wants to prove that no one steals from Sparta. Not a Trojan prince, not anyone. And this is where the oath comes in. Period. Remember the old pact all Helen's suitors swore? The one where they promised to defend her marriage, even if it wasn't to them. Well, guess what? It's time to pay up. Menelaus goes straight to his brother Agamemnon. Period. Mycenae, Ithaca, Argos, all those sunny spots on the map suddenly start sharpening swords. And just like that, Paris's golden apple decision isn't about beauty anymore. It's about siege towers, alliances, period. And 1,000 black ships preparing to cut across the Aegean. Back in Troy, Paris and Helen arrive to fanfare. But not everyone's clapping. King Priam, Paris's father, is confused but tries to smile. Period. He's been through worse. Hector, Paris's older brother, is less amused. Hector's the responsible one, the soldier, the guy who actually trains. He looks at Helen like she's a painting hanging on a cracked wall. Period. Beautiful, but dangerous. And the people of Troy, they love their prince, but they love peace more. They start whispering already, what has he done? Who will come for her? You sit beside Helen. Period. That evening in the palace gardens, she's dressed in Trojan silks now. Unfamiliar colors wrapped around familiar guilt. She doesn't speak. but her eyes skim the horizon, as if the ships are already coming. Period. And somewhere out there, they are. A quirky detail, according to some lesser-known sources. Paris actually tried to sneak Helen out dressed as a dancing priestess. There may or may not have been a donkey involved. Period. Honestly, ancient Greece was basically a reality show with worse lighting. Still, no amount of disguises can hide what's coming. The gods are watching, sharpening their divine interests. Period. Some will side with Troy, others will back Greece, but none will remain neutral. And you settle in deeper beside Paris, watching him preen beside Helen. He thinks he's still the hero of this story. Period. But the golden apple he once held might as well be a lit fuse. You wake if you were ever truly asleep atop a cliff overlooking the glittering Aegean Sea. The wind is gentle tonight, but it carries the scent of iron and leather. Period. Below, the Greek ships have begun to gather. Black sails spread like crows in formation. The oath has called them. The insult has united them. And now 1,000 ships prepare to ride the tide of war. Period. Straight toward Troy's golden gates. And standing at the center of it all is Agamemnon. He's the kind of king who enjoys being a king, beard always perfectly trimmed. Sandals suspiciously clean. Period. Voice pitched like someone who's constantly explaining something you already know. You watch him from a tent embroidered with gold thread as he sharpens plans like knives. He doesn't just want to retrieve Helen. Period. He wants glory. A legacy carved in stone. And if a few cities have to burn along the way, well, oops. Beside him stands Odysseus, who, fun fact, tried really hard not to come. Period. Odysseus is clever, maybe too clever. He's king of Ithaca, husband to Penelope, father to a newborn son, and not exactly itching to march off to siege a city for 10 years. Period. Until they put his baby in front of the plow. Yeah, that ended the act real quick. So here he is now, armor polished, brain ticking. He doesn't love Agamemnon's cause. Period. But he knows better than to fight the current. Plus, let's be honest, he's already scheming 3 moves ahead, likely writing the blueprint for the famous wooden horse. Period. Next arrive, Achilles. You spot him a mile away, golden armor, brooding eyes. The kind of walk that says, I once wrestled a lion and didn't even spill my wine. He's the Greek secret weapon. Period. A demigod, son of Thetis. The sea nymph who once tried to make him immortal by dipping him in the river Styx. Except she held him by the heel, which, if you've ever heard the term Achilles heel, period, you know how that ends. But right now, he's invincible, fast, deadly, and fueled by the kind of teenage angst only a warrior poet can master. He's accompanied by Patroclus, period. What he cares about is honor, glory, and having songs sung about him for centuries. Spoiler alert, he gets his wish. You drift past rows of soldiers training with spears, sharpening blades, period, braiding their hair for battle. The Greeks are not a unified people, they're a patchwork of city-states, each with their own dialects, grudges, and gods. But for once, they're aligned, period. An insult to one is an insult to all. A quirky tidbit, some stories say the Greek army had to delay their launch because they couldn't find Troy. That's right, imagine 1,000 ships circling the Aegean, period. Like a lost Uber driver with bad reception, ancient GPS was not a thing. Eventually, they found a local named Telephus who knew the route after Achilles stabbed him and then, ironically, healed him, period. With the same spear. Ancient medicine, folks, equal parts stabbing and magic. But just as they prepare to sail, the wind dies. Like, completely. Not a breeze, not a whisper. Period. The ship sits stranded, sails limp, as if Poseidon himself has gone on strike. Agamemnon paces, curses, consults oracles, sacrifices goats, and finally calls for Calchas, the resident seer. Period. You know, the guy with the wild eyes and that I talk to gods more than people vibe. Calchas delivers the kind of message no king wants to hear. Artemis, goddess of the hunt, is angry. Period. Why? Because Agamemnon killed a sacred deer in her grove. Maybe. Or maybe he just bragged loudly about being a better hunter. Either way, Artemis demands a price. The wind will return only if Agamemnon, period, sacrifices his daughter, Iphigenia. Yes, his daughter. You sit silently in the shadows as the camp goes cold. Even the birds seem to stop mid-song. Agamemnon's face tightens, period. He tries to stall, tries to trick her with tales of marriage to Achilles. But in the end, the sacrifice is made. Historians still debate what really happened, whether Iphigenia was actually killed, period, or whether Artemis swapped her at the last moment with a deer and spirited her away to become a priestess. Either way, blood hits the altar, the wind returns, and the ships sail, period. You glide above the fleet as they surge forward. Black sails spread wide. Bronze helmets flash in the sun. The sea churns, no longer gentle but hungry, like it knows something vast and terrible is coming, period. Below, Achilles stands at the prow of his ship, hair blowing like a shampoo commercial. Odysseus adjusts maps. Agamemnon drinks wine and pretends this is all going to go exactly as planned. Spoiler, it won't, period. And you breathe in the salt air, the tension, the weight of what's about to unfold. Troy has no idea what's coming. Or maybe it does. Maybe the city dreams restless dreams of fire, period. And wooden beasts and heroes who fall too soon. Either way, the Greeks are on their way, period. And nothing, not love, not oaths, not the gods themselves will stop them. The sea foams around the ships as you float above the masts, the air briny and buzzing with anticipation. You've never seen so many men in one place, bronze glinting like scales, period, or slicing rhythmically, each be echoing the same thought. War is near. The Greek fleet is moving like a living creature, stitched together by ambition, pride, and a collective need, period, to make Troy pay for the stolen queen. But Troy is not some weak village clinging to the coast. As you drift inland, the landscape changes. Olive groves give way to fortified walls, period. Massive, gleaming, and high enough to humble even the most daring warrior. Troy is rich, elegant, powerful, and unlike some mythical places, archaeologists actually found a site, period, they believe could be the real thing as Sarlik in modern-day Turkey. Layers of rubble suggest it was destroyed and rebuilt several times. Historians still argue whether the war was real, period, symbolic, or a blend of both, but if it happened, this was the place. Inside those thick stone walls lives a king named Priam, a ruler too old for battle but wise enough to read omens, period. Turn to ash, and then there's Paris, the man who started all this. You find him reclining in the shade, probably plucking at a lyre or oiling his hair. He's not exactly the picture, period, of military readiness. Paris is charming, soft-spoken, the kind of guy who'd ghost you and still get invited to dinner. Some say he trained with bow and arrow. But let's be real, period. This is not a man who's going to lead a charge. Still, Helen sits beside him. And when they laugh together, it's easy to forget the trail of wreckage behind them. The Trojans are not alone, period. Prince Hector, Paris' older brother, is Troy's real defender. You watch him spar in the courtyard, muscles coiled like a drawn bow. He's everything Paris is not: disciplined, brave, period, and slightly exhausted by his little brother's romantic escapades. Hector is the kind of man you'd want in your corner, honorable to a fault, a loyal son, and a terrifying presence on the battlefield, period. The city is split, torn between pride and pragmatism, a quirky little side note, in some versions of the myth. Helen herself grows bored of Paris and walks the battlements flirting with Trojan soldiers, period. Yeah, awkward. Meanwhile, Cassandra, Priam's daughter and cursed prophetess, is having a rough time. She knows what's coming: the fall, the blood, the fire, period. But her curse, thanks to a vengeful Apollo, is that no one believes her. She screams warnings into the void, People smile politely and hand her herbal tea. It's a cruel joke, period. Perfect foresight, zero credibility. Honestly, if Cassandra were around today, she'd probably run a Twitter thread no one takes seriously until it's too late outside the gates. The first Greek ship lands, period. The beach is chaos. Men disembark, shields clang. Horses whinny. And tents rise like mushrooms after rain. It's like a very stabby music festival. You float among them as generals shout orders, period. And cook fires bloom. Achilles stretches like a cat, savoring the tension. Odysseus quietly marks the cliffs and counts troop movements, always thinking. Agamemnon paces like he's starring in a play, period, where he's both hero and villain. And then, without fanfare, the first battle begins. No declaration, no formal duel, just a sudden scream, the clash of swords, and the sand painted red, period. You watch as the Greeks charge forward, eager to make a statement. The Trojans answer, pouring from their gates like a storm. Spears fly, shields splinter. You hover above it all, eyes wide, period. Stomach twisted, mainstream historical fact. Bronze Age warfare was brutal, up close, and deeply personal. No long-distance missiles or smart bombs, just muscle, metal, and the raw, terrifying intimacy of combat, period. The Iliad may romanticize it, but let's be clear. This was mud, blood, and screams. And then, amidst the noise, Achilles enters the fray. It's like time slows. He moves differently, period. Fast, fluid, like a storm given form. His spear finds hearts before they know it's coming. His rage is silent, focused. You can see why poets still write about him. He fights not like a man, period, but like a force of nature. And the Trojans learn to fear his name, yet the war doesn't end. Troy holds. Its walls, said to be built by Poseidon himself, do not crumble, period. Its defenders retreat, regroup, and strike back. The Greeks dig in, tents become villages, centuries rotate shifts, and so begins the long, grinding siege. 10 years, period. That's how long this war will stretch. Not days, not weeks. A full decade of blood, betrayal, and board games made from bone. You wonder how anyone keeps track, period. Some soldiers will grow old on this beach. Some children will be born never knowing peace, period. You glide through the camp as years pass like sand through fingers. Agamemnon and Achilles argue endlessly about glory, about women, about who deserves to be top dog. Odysseus mediates, invents, adapts, period. Hector rides out to challenge Greek champions. Paris sulks or sings, depending on the day. There are moments of beauty marriages and secret friendships that burn bright. Fireside stories shared under stars, period. But they're fleeting. The war consumes all. One quirky tidbit, there's a myth that says during this long stalemate, the Greeks built a massive wall around their camp to protect against Trojan attacks, period. And yes, this wall gets its own epic battle later, complete with flooding by angry gods. Because why stop at human drama when you can throw in divine hydraulics? Still, the biggest turning point is yet to come, period. It's not a battle. It's not a death. It's an argument over a girl. And once again, you'll find yourself staring into the fire, wondering why the fates love drama as much as mortals do. You linger near the Greek encampment, firelight flickering like memories across taut canvas and polished bronze. The sea murmurs behind you. Waves drag at the sand, period. The fighting pauses for now, but tension hums in the air, coiled and restless. And then the shouting starts. At the center of it, Agamemnon, the High King, and Achilles, period. Two lions in the same cage. The argument boils down to a single woman Briseis. Achilles were prize. A girl taken from a raised city, gifted to him for his glory, period. Agamemnon, in a fit of ego, decides to claim her for himself. Because, well, he's the king and Achilles is getting the famous. Achilles snaps. He doesn't cry, period. He doesn't throw a spear. He just stops, refuses to fight, pulls back from battle, and lets the Greeks fend for themselves. His tent becomes a tomb of pride. Period. His sword, idle, his rage, coiled and simmering like a volcano just beneath the surface. And honestly, the Greeks start losing. Hard. You drift over battlefield after battlefield. Period. Morale crumbles. Casualties mount. Even the mighty Ajax begins to wear thin. Odysseus starts whispering schemes behind tents. You can almost hear the chorus, "If only Achilles would return." Period. Mainstream historical fact. In many ancient cultures, including Mycenaean Greece, honor and personal glory weren't just social constructs, they were currency. To be slighted like Achilles was, period, to be robbed not only of pride, but of purpose. That's why his silence is more deafening than battle cries. And yet, in the shadows of war, friendship burns bright. Enter Patroclus, period. His relationship with Achilles is open to interpretation. Were they best friends, cousins, lovers? Historians still argue whether Homer intended romance, brotherhood, or something between the lines, period. But what's clear is that Patroclus sees Achilles like no one else does. He alone can enter the tent. He alone dares to speak hard truths, as the Greeks suffer more and more, period. Yes, the famous armor forged by gods, the radiant bronze that makes men gasp and enemies flinch. In it, Patroclus hopes to inspire the Greeks, to make the Trojans think their nightmare has returned, period. He rides into battle like a ghost in borrowed glory, and for a while it works. The Greeks rally. The Trojans hesitate. Patroclus carves through the enemy ranks like a comet, period, glowing with courage not quite his own. You can feel Achilles watching from afar, torn between pride and fear. This is his dearest friend, walking the blade's edge in his name. But glory has teeth, period. Patroclus pushes too far, too deep into Trojan territory. And then, Hector finds him. It's not a long fight. Patroclus is brave, but he's not Achilles. And Hector is in his prime, period. Driven by duty and a weary rage. The duel ends with blood on the sand and a body stripped of divine armor. The Trojans don't know it's not Achilles until the helmet rolls away, period, revealing a face still soft with youth. The news hits the Greek camp like a lightning bolt. You see Achilles stumble not physically, but inwardly, like the world's axis is cracked, period. He doesn't scream. He doesn't move for a long time. He just sits in the dim tent, staring at the sea as if waiting for it to take him too. Then, slowly, grief gives way to rage, period. Not the hot, clumsy rage of a bruised ego, but the cold, white fire of loss. This is what brings him back, but not before a moment that haunts even the most hardened soldiers, period. You hover nearby as Achilles cradles Patroclus' body, whispering promises. He will avenge him. He will kill Hector. He will damn the consequences. As Achilles unmasked, stripped of pride, period. Burned hollow. Quirky tidbit. Some versions of the myth say Achilles mixed Patroclus' ashes with his own later, requesting their remains be buried in the same urn. Ancient Greek bromance or something deeper, period. The poets leave it for you to decide. The next day, Achilles stands beneath a silver dawn. Smeared in ash, smeared in grief, he calls out Hector by name. And Troy listens, period. The battle that follows feels less like war, more like fate made flesh. You drift above as the armies part, forming a circle around to men Achilles and Hector. The duel is long, brutal, period. Breathless, steel clashes like thunder, dust swirls. The walls of Troy loom behind them like silent gods, and then Hector falls. It's not a fair fight. Achilles is fueled by more than skill, period. He's powered by grief, by vengeance, by the fire of a friend he couldn't save. He drags Hector's body behind his chariot, circling the walls of Troy, a show of dominance. A warning, period. A rage without mercy. Even the gods frown at this. In Olympus, the divine audience grows restless. Achilles is becoming too much, too proud, too cruel. Zeus sends a message, period. And eventually, Priam, king of Troy, old and broken, sneaks into the Greek camp, unarmed, unguarded, to beg for his son's body. What happens next is one of those quiet moments, period, in history or myth when you believe in humanity again. Achilles weeps, not loudly, not theatrically, just enough to show he remembers. He helps Priam wash Hector's body, period, returns it with dignity. For a heartbeat, the war pauses, and in the flicker of firelight, two fathers, one of a dead son, one of a fallen friend, grieve together. It won't last, period. But it matters. You sit in the lull after vengeance. Achilles, for all his fury, has quieted. He returned Hector's body, yes, but the war doesn't end with that moment of shared grief, period. Troy still stands. The Greeks still camp outside its walls, their tents flapping like tired sighs in the salt air. The golden apple's curse hasn't quite finished its work yet, period. And neither has Achilles. His fate still waits, curled up in prophecy like a sleeping lion. You remember that part, don't you? The choice he made before even stepping foot on Trojan sand. Period. A long life without glory, or a short one that would echo through time. Well, time's almost up. The gods know it. They always do. Apollo, ever the golden archer, period, ever the mischief maker, doesn't much care for Achilles. Maybe it's jealousy. Maybe he's just bored. But when Paris, yes, that same Paris, still somehow alive, pulls back a bowstring, period, Apollo guides the arrow right to Achilles' heel. Yes, that heel. The one part of him left mortal. The legends say his mother, Thetis, dipped him into the river Styx as a baby, period. But in the myth's poetic logic, it's perfect. The arrow strikes. Achilles falls. Not in the middle of battle, not in some heroic blaze. He crumples like any man onto dirt, period, bleeding from a foot, no matter how many warriors he felled, no matter how brightly his name burned. His end is strangely quiet. You almost miss it. That's the thing about myth, period. It never promises fairness. The Greeks mourn. The war pauses again, briefly. Achilles' body is burned on a great pyre. His ashes mingled just like he asked with those of Patroclus, period. Together, in death, they are finally inseparable. One flame, one urn, maybe even one story. But then Odysseus steps forward. He always does. You float over a new gathering, period. A war council this time, where the Greek commanders bicker over who should get Achilles' divine armor. It gleams nearby, freshly polished, untouched by dust. Ajax, the massive warrior, period. With logic, with charm. He weaves a case so intricate, so flattering, so clever, that the others, perhaps against their own sense of fairness, give him the prize. The armor, period. The symbol. The ghost of Achilles now walks with Odysseus. Ajax is humiliated. You feel it like a shadow falling. This isn't just a snub, it's a public stripping of honor, period. And Ajax, he can't take it. In a haze of fury, he storms into the night, sword in hand, vowing revenge. But Athena, goddess of wisdom, clouds his mind. He ends up slaughtering a field of livestock, period, thinking they're men. When he comes to surrounded by dead sheep, he realizes what he's done, realizes how far he's fallen, and he falls again. This time, on his own sword, period. Quirky tidbit, some ancient Greeks held memorial festivals in Ajax's honor, but left out the usual sacrificial offerings. Why? Because suicide was taboo, even for heroes. The Greeks are bleeding heroes, period. Faster than the Trojans can kill them, yet the city still stands. So Odysseus, clever, sneaky, relentless, hatches a plan, a weird one. He pitches the idea of pretending to sail away, period. A fake retreat, and in their place, the Greeks will leave a gift for the Trojans, a massive wooden horse, hollow and haunting. Supposedly a tribute, supposedly a surrender. You watch the construction begin, period. Quiet at first. Hammers tap, ropes creak. with groans under the shaping. It takes days, maybe weeks. The horse rises like a god out of lumber, tall enough to tower over men, period. Big enough to hide warriors in its belly. When it's done, it looks ridiculous. It really does. Like some oversized parade float that forgot to be festive. But that's the point, period. It's meant to confuse, to intrigue, to invite curiosity. And curiosity, you remember, is what got us here in the first place. Mainstream historical fact. Some historians think the horse, period, was metaphorical. Maybe an earthquake, since Poseidon, god of quakes, was associated with horses. Or even a siege engine shaped vaguely like one. But myth doesn't care about plausibility, period. It cares about drama. Night falls. The Greeks load the horse with their finest warriors, Odysseus, Menelaus, Neoptolemus, Achilles' son, because we're keeping the legacy strong. Then, they burn their camp, period, or at least pretend to, and sail just far enough to vanish from view. Troy wakes to silence. You hover over the city gates as the Trojans stumble out, blinking in the morning light, period. The battlefield is empty. The ships are gone. And standing there, absurd and solemn, is the horse. They debate, of course. Some say burn it, some say drag it inside, period. A priest named Laocoon shouts warnings. Beware Greeks bearing gifts. But just as he does, sea serpents, yes, real ones rise from the surf and strangle him and his sons, period. Coincidence? Divine sabotage? Historians still argue whether the serpents were a metaphor for silencing the scent, or just some good old-fashioned mythological pest control. So the horse is brought in, period. You float above the city walls as it rolls through the gates. The whole city cheering like fools at a parade. They celebrate into the night, feasting, drinking, laughing. You feel it building, period. That eerie silence just before the turn. And when it turns fast. At midnight, the hatch creaks open. The warriors spill out. They rush to open the gates, period. And outside, just beyond the horizon, Greek sails return. Troy is doomed. You're drifting now, but not far. The firelight flickers as Troy crumbles beneath its own pride. The Greeks pour in like flood water. No mercy, no hesitation, period. Steel on stone, shouting, smoke. You might be thinking, wait, this started with a beauty contest. Yes, it did. One golden apple, one petty squabble among immortals, period. And now this, the collapse of a city that had stood for centuries. It's poetic in a grim way. History tends to work like that. The butterfly flaps its wings, and 10 years later, period. Cities burn. Inside the walls, chaos reigns. Fires climb like ivy up the towers. Families flee down alleys that no longer offer shelter. You hover over Priam's palace, what's left of it, period. The old king, once regal, now shuffles through the ruins like a ghost in his own home. Neoptolemus finds him. Yes, Achilles' son, young, proud, vicious. He drags Priam to the altar. Period. The very place that should be sacred, Priam begs, reminds him of the gods. But Neoptolemus, he doesn't care. He kills him right there, on Zeus's altar. That's bold even for the Greeks. Period. The Greeks loot the temples. They take statues, gold, icons of gods they themselves worship. Strange, isn't it? The duality. You revere the same gods as your enemy, and yet in war. Period. Those boundaries melt like wax. And what of Helen? You remember her, don't you? The face that launched 1,000 ships, though really, it was a handful of bad decisions, period. Menelaus, her husband, finds her at last. And she doesn't plead. She doesn't run. She stands, perfectly poised, almost amused. Some say she wore a transparent robe, daring him to strike her down, period. He doesn't, even after all this. Menelaus can't kill her. He drags her back to Sparta instead. Whether out of love, weakness, or political calculation, no one's sure, period. Historians still argue whether Helen was a victim, a seductress, or simply a woman caught in a power play far beyond her control. Now pause. Zoom out with me. Troy's ashes. Period. The desecration. That's not something she forgets or forgives. The winds turn. The sea becomes hostile, storms brew, sudden and violent. Many of the victorious Greeks never make it home. Period. Shipwrecks, madness, reversals. In fact, the return journeys become epic tales of their own. Odysseus, especially. Ah yes, Odysseus. You'll follow him later. But for now, period. He's just one more tired warrior, clutching at the ropes of the ship, wondering whether he'll ever see Ithaca again. Spoiler, not for a while. 10 years, actually. But tonight, let's keep our focus on the fall. Period. There's one more story worth sinking into of Aeneas. You might not know him yet, but the Romans certainly did. In their version, Aeneas escapes the burning city, carrying his father on his back. Period. Leading his son by the hand. It's a powerful image through generations, walking out of fire. He's guided by the gods, protected, maybe, destined for something bigger. Aeneas wanders too, across the seas, period, through shipwrecks, storms, and lost companions, until finally he finds a new home. Italy. Yes, that Italy. The one that would later build an empire. So, in a sense, period, Troy doesn't truly die. It transforms. It seeds something else. The golden apple's curse still echoes, just under the skin of history. Quirky tidbit, the Roman poet Virgil basically invented this whole backstory, period, to connect Rome to Troy. Was it myth-making? Absolutely. But also nation-building. Because if you're going to start an empire, you might as well trace your roots back to gods and heroes, period. And the women of Troy, though, their stories don't end with the city walls. The surviving Trojan women are taken as were prizes, parceled out like spoils. Cassandra. The cursed prophetess, remember her, period. She ends up with Agamemnon. It goes badly. She basically invented this whole backstory, period, to connect Rome to Troy. Was it myth-making? Absolutely. But also nation-building. Because if you're going to start an empire, you might as well trace your roots back to gods and heroes, period. And the women of Troy, though, their stories don't end with the city walls. The surviving Trojan women are taken as were prizes, parceled out like spoils. Cassandra. The cursed prophetess, remember her, period. She ends up with Agamemnon. It goes badly. She warns him they'll die. He laughs it off. He dies. So does she. Historians still argue whether Cassandra's tale was meant as a caution, period, against ignoring female voices or just another tragedy piled onto the heap. Andromache, Hector's widow, is given to Neoptolemus. Hecuba, Priam's queen, is enslaved. You feel the weight of this, period. The war may be over, but the grief doesn't clock out. It lingers, gnawing at the survivors like seawater in an old wound. You shift now, floating higher, away from the ruins, period. Troy is just smoke on the horizon. The stars blink quietly overhead. The gods, bored again, look elsewhere. Their game has ended. For now, the golden apple lies forgotten in the dust, period. One fruit, one moment. That's all it took to unravel an empire, spark a decade-long war, and fill the world with stories that would outlive even the gods themselves. And yet, you're still here, period. Still drifting, still wondering. Did Paris ever think it would come to this? Period. Did Aphrodite care? Did Helen? Maybe. Maybe not. Mortals rarely see the full shape of their choices. Even the gods, sometimes, forget the ripples they cause. But you remember, period. And that makes all the difference. You're still gliding. Like mist, the war is over but the story isn't. That's the trick with these old myths. The sword may stop swinging, but consequences ripple outward, period. Just because the fires are out doesn't mean everything goes dark. No, you're heading into the aftershocks now, the part most people forget. Take Agamemnon, for instance. Period. Commander of the Greeks, proud king of Mycenae, and possibly the most cursed family man in all of mythology. He's headed home now, his ship skimming over choppy seas. Period. A few prized treasures in tow. Chief among them, Cassandra, the doomed Trojan priestess who sees everything and is believed by absolutely no one. It's like being gifted a psychic. Period. But back home in Mycenae, Agamemnon's got a welcome party brewing. His wife, Clytemnestra, is waiting. And oh, she is not thrilled. Remember the awkward moment 10 years ago. Period. When Agamemnon sacrificed their daughter, Iphigenia, to get good sailing weather. Yeah, she remembers too in Technicolor. And she hasn't forgiven him. Now here's your mainstream historical nugget. Period. So maybe Clytemnestra's wrath wasn't so outlandish after all. She welcomes him home with smiles and soft words, leads him to a bath. Bathing in ancient Greece was a luxury. Period. A cleansing ritual, or, in this case, a trap. She throws a net over him, slaughters him while he's tangled up and helpless. Yep. She kills the king of the Greek army in his own bathtub. Period. Some versions say she did it herself. Others claim she got help from her lover, Aegisthus, who had his own grudges to settle. Historians still argue whether this reflects a real political coup. Period. Cassandra, she knows what's coming, tries to warn the household, but no one listens. Of course they don't. They never listen to Cassandra. She goes into the palace, resign. Period. The door closes. She never comes out. That's the thing about the end of wars, every victory casts a shadow. The Greeks didn't just leave Troy with treasures. They left with curses. Period. And ours during the war gets off pretty late. All things considered, he returns to Argos, but finds his wife has been unfaithful. Maybe not the happiest reunion, but at least no bathtubs involved. Period. Ajax the Lesser, not so lucky, remember. He dragged Cassandra from Athena's temple during the sack of Troy. Very uncool. Athena still steamed. His shipwrecks. He clings to a rock. Period. Boasts that not even the gods can drown him. And Zeus, apparently not a fan of trash talk, splits the rock in half. Down Ajax goes. There's a moral in there somewhere about humility, but it's probably too late. Period. Quirky tidbit, the ancient Greeks used Ajax's story as a warning against hubris, a favorite theme of theirs. You could win wars, topple cities, defy death itself, but one wrong word to a god. Period. That's your ticket to the underworld. And then there's Odysseus. You've heard his name whispered already. Wily, clever, always thinking 3 moves ahead. He came up with a Trojan horse, after all. Period. But now, he's setting sail for Ithaca, just a speck of an island. He thinks he'll be home in weeks. Spoiler, he won't. But that's another bedtime tale entirely. Odysseus' journey becomes one long cosmic delay. Period. Tempests, monsters, goddesses with questionable boundaries. You'd almost think the gods were trying to keep him away on purpose, which, in fact, they are. Especially Poseidon, still cranky about Odysseus blinding his one-eyed son. Period. Fathers can be touchy like that. But let's leave Odysseus for now. You'll visit him in full another night. Tonight, drift eastward, past the sinking stars and the lapping surf. Period. Past the hollow ruins of Troy. Because while the Greeks scatter home and fall into their tangled webs, there's one thread still winding outward. Danaus. Yes, him again. Picture him carrying his father Anchises. Period. Through the smoky rubble, little Ascanius clutching his hand. It's one of the most enduring images of survival from the entire war. Aeneas doesn't just flee. He carries legacy with him. Period. His family, his gods, his grief, the weight of all that loss. He wears it like armor. The gods seemingly invested in him, especially Venus, his divine mother. She's guiding him. Period. Pushing him towards something more. You can feel it in the way storms part just enough to let him through, or the way friendly strangers seem to recognize something in him. Destiny, maybe. period. Eventually, he lands in Carthage. Now here's your historical fact. Carthage was a powerful North African city, famously at odds with Rome in the Punic Wars centuries later, period. But in Aeneas's tale, it's a stopover, a painful one, because that's where he meets Dido, queen. Smart, capable, and totally, tragically doomed. She falls for him. Deep, period. They share a firelit cave in the rain. Ancient shorthand for this relationship matters. But the gods pull him away. Literally. Mercury shows up like a divine breakup text. Aeneas must leave. Period. Founding a future empire waits for no man. Dido. She builds a pyre, climbs it. Curses Aeneas as the flames rise. Some say this myth is a political metaphor, Rome justifying its hatred for Carthage. Period. Others think it's about the price of ambition. Historians still argue whether Dido was a real historical queen, or just a tragic stand-in for imperial guilt. Either way, Aeneas sails on. Period. You pause here, floating between broken kingdoms and unborn empires. The sea is calm for now, but beneath the surface, the consequences are stirring. Because every war casts a shadow, period. And the deeper the story goes, the more those shadows start to dance. You're still drifting, lulled by waves carrying Aeneas forward. His ship cuts through a quiet sea. When soft against sails, you hear creaking wood and murmurs of prayers, period. Aeneas heads for Italy. A name, a direction, a ghost on the horizon. He doesn't get there quickly. Destiny takes its time. Aeneas and followers wander, land in strange places, period. Battle monsters, lose people, gain allies. The gods remain annoyingly involved, sometimes helpful, often cryptic, occasionally cruel. It's like being guided by a GPS that occasionally just says, period. Along the way, Aeneas finds prophecy after prophecy pointing him toward Latium. You picture him squinting at each new oracle, wondering, can't you just give me a map, period. But no, ancient destiny doesn't believe in clarity, only in riddles, glowing signs, and the occasional talking animal. Here's a mainstream historical fact. The myth of Aeneas was a major foundation, period, for Roman identity. The Romans believed he was their ancestor, not just a hero, but the literal forefather of their entire civilization. Julius Caesar himself claimed descent from Aeneas and through him, from Venus, period. Maybe fight a few wars, and Aeneas is good at that last part. He meets King Latinus, who's kind of intrigued by this shipwrecked prince. Latinus has a daughter, Lavinia, and he offers her, period, to Aeneas in marriage. Seems simple, right? Except nothing in mythology ever is Turnus. He's a local prince, Lavinia's original suitor, and not too thrilled about being replaced, period, by a foreigner with divine endorsements. Think of him as the guy at the party who was dating the hostess and now has to watch her flirt with the mysterious newcomer. Awkward, period. Turnus rallies his people. War breaks out again. You start to wonder if ancient heroes ever just sat down for a cup of tea instead of launching a campaign. But this is where things come full circle, period. Aeneas, survivor of Troy, now leads the kind of siege he once endured. He builds alliances, wins battles, and eventually faces Turnus in a one-on-one duel because, naturally, period, originally had Aeneas spare Turnus, show mercy, be the better man. But over time, the ending was revised. Instead, Aeneas kills Turnus in a fit of rage after seeing the stolen belt. Period. Of a fallen friend, poetic vengeance wins out over compassion. It's blood for blood. The foundation of Rome, apparently, needed a little brutality baked in. And here's the scholarly wrinkle, period. Historians still argue whether the Aeneid, the epic poem telling the story, was finished by its author, Virgil. He reportedly asked for the manuscript to be destroyed upon his death, period. Emperor Augustus refused. The Rome we know, the mythos they inherited, might be built on an unfinished draft. So even empire, it seems, is born from compromise. With Turnus dead, period, Aeneas secures his new home. He marries Lavinia, founds a city, names it Lavinium in her honor. His son, Ascanius, will later found Alba Longa. And many generations after that, centuries down the line, period, Rome will rise. You're watching the end of one cycle and the quiet start of another. Troy burned, and from its ashes comes something else, something harder, sharper, more pragmatic, period. The Greeks had glory. The Romans, they preferred order. But let's zoom out even further, because the gods, they're still watching. Remember the golden apple? Period. The original shiny catalyst tossed by Eris, goddess of discord. You'd think the lesson would be, maybe don't crash weddings and start fights over beauty contests. But the gods, they love patterns. Period. They repeat them like choruses in a sad song. And Eris, she doesn't disappear. She lingers, whispers in the corners of halls, waits for another opportunity to throw the world into chaos. Period. She isn't finished. Not by a long shot. You think about that apple now, how something so small could start such a fire. It's always that way, isn't it? The little things. Period. A careless gift, a bruised ego, a single word said at the wrong time. History, myth, life. They all hinge on moments no one thinks will matter. Annius fades from the spotlight. Period. He dies. Eventually. Some say he was taken by the gods, like a hero absorbed in the starlight. Others believe he fell in battle. Historians still argue whether Annius represents a real migration. Period. Of Eastern people into Italy, or just Rome giving itself a legendary backstory to justify its rise. The truth, it's probably a bit of both. But by now, you're curled deep into the folds, period, of this mythic quilt. Your breath is slow, your thoughts a little hazy. The roar of battle has faded into the hush of olive groves. Annius is gone, but his story remains. And that's the magic, period, of these old tales. They never really end. They just echo through cities built on ruins, period. Through poems half finished, through the dreams you're drifting toward now. You settle into the quiet, swaddled in ancient memory. With Troy lost and Annius having laid the groundwork for Rome, you'd think we'd be wrapping up. But no, because myth is less like a straight road, period. One story grows into another, curling into new directions, and the tendrils of Troy reach far. Back in Greece, not everyone got a happy ending. Most didn't. Remember Menelaus, period. The guy whose wife, Helen, was stolen, kicking off this whole absurd drama. He does get her back, sort of, after the war. He finds Helen, whether she was kidnapped or complicit is still up for debate, period. They return to Sparta together. Now, here's a historical anchor. The real city of Sparta was, by this time, already an important power. Its kings claimed descent from Heracles, period. But Helen and Menelaus, they don't go back to war. Instead, they settle into a strange domestic peace. According to some tales, she's forgiven. They live out their days quietly, period. Or, depending on the version, she's driven out or even murdered by a vengeful relative. And here's the quirky bit. In Egypt, there was a whole other version of the story, period. The Greeks didn't return to ticker tape parades and victory banquets. No, most of them were punished by the gods, by fate, by bad luck. Take Agamemnon, the general who led the Greek forces, period. After 10 years of war, he finally returns home to Mycenae. You'd expect a hero's welcome. Instead, he's greeted by his wife, Clytemnestra, and her lover, you see, while he was away, period. She'd been stewing over the fact that Agamemnon sacrificed their daughter, Iphigenia, to appease the gods before sailing for Troy. So, yeah, not exactly a warm reunion. Agamemnon is murdered in his bath, period. Some say stabbed. Others say she trapped him in a net and then struck. Either way, not a hallmark ending. Historians still argue whether Clytemnestra was portrayed more as a tragic figure or a villainous, period. Their son, Orestes, grows up and eventually avenges his father by killing his mother. which sounds horrifying and is, but the Greeks love these generational spirals of vengeance. Period. But they also come with strange moments of beauty, like glints of light on broken glass. After the bloodshed, Orestes is haunted by the furious, terrifying goddesses who punish familial murder. Period. He seeks purification and finds it, not through violence, but through justice. A trial is held. Arguments are made, and in a surprise twist, Athena herself steps in as judge and grants mercy. Period. That's the moment the Greeks say their world shifted from blood for blood revenge to structured legal justice, a civilization leveling up, a god pressing pause on the cycle of retribution. Period. Meanwhile, back with Odysseus, yes. He's still out there. You'd think his epic could wrap up now, but no. He's still marooned, still ticking off mythical islands like stamps in a doomed passport. Period. One of his more poetic stops, the island of the Phaeacians. It's a paradise, of course. Beautiful beaches, friendly people, possibly the ancient Greek version of a resort town. Period. He tells them his story, basically recapping the entire Odyssey so far while reclining. Because even ancient heroes enjoy being the center of attention. They finally help him get home, slipping him onto a ship. Period. He awakens in Ithaca at last. Here's your historical nugget. Ithaca was and still is a real island in the Ionian Sea. But scholars continue to debate whether the modern island is the Ithaca, period, of Homer's poems. Some believe the geography doesn't match. Others say the poetry matters more than the map. Odysseus doesn't exactly stroll back into his palace and start rearranging furniture, period. No. He finds his home crawling with suitors, dozens of arrogant men who assumed he was dead and have be, and courting Penelope, his faithful wife, while eating him out of house and hearth, period. Penelope, by the way, has been weaving a burial shroud by day and unweaving it by night, stalling for time like a mythological genius. Odysseus disguises himself as a beggar because apparently subtlety is an option, period. When you've aged 20 years and no one recognizes you anymore, he observes, waits, and then, at the right moment, strings his old bow and surprise, slaughters all the suitors, period. The poetic justice is almost surgical and a bit terrifying. Then comes the reunion. Penelope tests him. She wants to be sure. So she tells a servant to move their bed knowing it's impossible, period. Odysseus built the bed himself from a living olive tree. When he says so, she knows it's really him. It's one of the few soft endings in Greek myth. A moment of peace, of recognition, period. The war is finally over. The long journey ends not in glory, but in quiet. A man, a woman, a shared bed rooted in an ancient tree. And here's your fringed tale. In some lesser-known versions, period. Odysseus doesn't live happily ever after. He grows restless, wanders again, or is killed by his own son, born from an affair he had with Circe. Yeah, myths just love a good plot twist, period. But for now, you rest in that olive-wood bed, with Penelope beside you, and the roar of war long faded. You survived 10 years of siege, 10 years of wandering, period. And still, you're here, breathing, dreaming, drifting. The myths continue without you for a while. But you lucky you get to close your eyes and sleep. You're still floating past gods, warriors, and olive tree beds. Don't get too comfortable because just when the dust has settled, the Greeks start another cycle of drama, period. We're moving into the ripples of the Trojan War, the way it echoes through future generations. Still haunting history like the smell of smoke on old cloth. Let's slide into the lineage of Achilles, period. Remember him, tall, shiny, invincible, except for the heel. You'd think his death would have been the end of his story. But in myth, legacy is often louder than life, period. Achilles had a son named Neoptolemus, try saying the 3 times fast without turning into a goat. Neoptolemus fought in the final stages of the Trojan War. He was brutal, even for Greek standards, period. Killed Priam at the altar, took Andromache, Hector's wife, as a war prize, and basically walked around like a wrecking ball with parent issues. But Neoptolemus also had a weird post-war journey. Period. Some versions say he settled down and ruled part of Epirus, a region in northwest Greece. Others whisper that he was eventually murdered at Delphi, possibly because he insulted the gods. Period. Now, zoom out a little. You remember Helen and Menelaus? Their daughter Hermione, yes. That name existed long before Hogwarts was originally promised to Orestes, Agamemnon's son, but was then married off. Period. To Neoptolemus. You can imagine how well that went over. Orestes eventually killed Neoptolemus and married Hermione anyway. Ancient Greek matchmaking makes modern reality TV look tame. Period. This leads us to another thread: the Odyssey's forgotten children, Telemachus, son of Odysseus and Penelope, actually gets some airtime post-epic. He may have married Circe's daughter. Period. Yes, that's Circe the witch with the pig transforming powers. Weird family dinners, right? Dad's ex is your mother-in-law. Classic Greek awkwardness. Meanwhile, Aeneas the Trojan who escaped, period, has arrived in Italy. This is where Greek and Roman myth really starts shaking hands awkwardly across the centuries. Aeneas battles native tribes, allies with some, and ultimately wins enough land. Period. Julius Caesar himself claimed descent from Aeneas via his son. Ascanius, also known as Iulus. That's why Caesar's family name was Julius. It's mythological branding at its finest. Period. But in Virgil's Aeneid, the hero doesn't get a happy ending either. Aeneas' story is steeped in fate and duty. He's not allowed to chase personal happiness. He falls in love with Dido. Period. The queen of Carthage, but leaves her on orders from the gods to continue his destiny. Dido, devastated, curses him and commits suicide. That one breakup spawns centuries of conflict between Rome and Carthage. Period. Seriously, that's one bad date. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some ancient scholars suggested that the Romans added Dido into the myth to justify their wars with Carthage. Like, oh, sorry we burned your city. Period. But our hero broke her heart 800 years ago. Petty? Absolutely. But effective? Back in Greece. Myths start to fossilize. They become lessons, not just stories. They're retold in plays, temples. Period. Scrolls. They're used to explain the unexplainable, justify the brutal, inspire the noble. Think of it like early PR, but with more thunderbolts and fewer legal disclaimers. And yet, period. Scholars still debate which parts of the Trojan War were based on truth. Did Troy exist? Was there really a war? The city of Troy has been found several layers of it, actually at a site in modern-day Turkey. Period. But we don't know which Troy was the Troy. One layer shows signs of siege and fire around 1200 BCE, matching the traditional date. But there's no golden apple in the rubble, no arrow lodged, period. And an Achilles heel, just burnt stone, broken walls, and the bones of ordinary people who probably didn't get cool names in the poems. Here's where myth and history blur like watercolor left in the rain. Period. Did Helen really exist? Was she kidnapped or complicit? Some historians suggest Helen might have been a symbol of power, of beauty, of the excuse men used to wage war. Maybe she never existed as a person, period. Or maybe she was real and just extremely unlucky still awake. Good. Because we're not done quite yet. The gods remember them. Petty, powerful, over-involved. They don't just fade away after Troy. Period. But they do go quieter. Worship of the Olympians continued for centuries, but their voices in myth became more distant. They transformed from active participants to distant legends, like retired celebrities showing up only for cameos. Period. Eventually, newer beliefs began to rise. The Olympians were slowly edged out by philosophy, mystery cults, and later, Christianity. Zeus and Hera were carved into statues, not feared in temples. Period. Apollo's oracle at Delphi gave her last prophecy in the 4th century CE. It was something like, "The god is gone, chilling, right? Still, their stories remain. We whisper them at bedtime. Period. Study them in school. Reboot them in movies. And not because they're morally flawless, definitely not, but because they reflect something human. Messy, petty, glorious, tragic. We use them, period, to talk about love, loss, ambition, revenge, forgiveness. They're our own long shadow. So when you close your eyes tonight and think about the golden apple, just a fruit, really, tossed into a party, period. You're not just remembering a myth. You're watching how a single choice can echo across generations. Period. Burning cities and building empires. All because someone didn't get an invitation. Sleep tight. You're still here drifting deeper, wrapped in myth where every whisper sounds like a lullaby, and a little like a threat. Don't worry. Nothing sinister. Just divine punishment. Ghostly vengeance. Period. So, let's rewind to the House of Atruse. That delightful family tree where every branch is broken and bleeding. If you're wondering why Greek tragedies are so dramatic, period, the curse on this family is so thick. You need several generations of therapy and a sacrificial goat just to shake off the vibes. At the center now is Orestes, son of Agamemnon and Clytemnestra, period. Agamemnon came back from Troy only to be murdered in the bathtub by his wife and her lover. That would have made for a terrible homecoming dinner. Orestes, still a child, is whisked away to safety, period. Years later, Orestes returns with a mission: avenge his father's murder by killing his own mother. It's Greek justice eye for an eye. Family dinner for a family murder, period. With encouragement from his sister Electra and some nudging from Apollo, he does the deed. He kills Clytemnestra and her lover Aegisthus. But here's the twist: the Furies, period. Historians still argue whether the myth of Orestes reflects early Greek debates on justice and morality. Was it okay to commit a murder to avenge a murder? Or was there a shift happening? Period. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The Eumenides was first performed in 458 BCE, during the Dionysia festival in Athens. It was one of the earliest recorded public discussions of trial by jury, period. In the play, Orestes is finally put on trial at the Areopagus, a real hill in Athens where murder cases were judged. The deciding vote, cast by none other than Athena, period. She sides with Orestes, signaling the end of revenge-based justice. The Furies begrudgingly accept the verdict and are renamed the Eumenides, which means the kindly ones, period. Now, let's swerve slightly because the story of Orestes doesn't end with a courtroom drama. He continues traveling, trying to escape his fate. Some stories say he ends up in Taurus, period. Here's your quirky tidbit. In some versions, Orestes brings a wooden statue of Artemis back from Taurus, which becomes the sacred idol for a real temple in Boron. Ancient Greeks were obsessed, period. Meanwhile, Electra fades into the background. She never really gets a happy ending. Just lots of rage, loyalty, and tragic staring into the middle distance. A perfect Greek heroine, period. As the curtain lowers on this cursed family, you might start to notice a pattern. The Greek myths are never about just one thing. They layer themes like backlog revenge, fate, family, guilt, period, and sleep, of course. All great tragedies are, in some way, lullabies in reverse. You fall into them slowly, forgetting where the dream ends and the myth begins. Now take a breath. Period. Remember, Aeneas, we're back to him, just for a minute. Because while Orestes was wrestling Furies and ancient courtroom drama, Aeneas was building cities. His son, Ascanius, goes on to found Alba Longa, period. An early Latin kingdom. Centuries later, Romulus and Remus, yes, the ones raised by a wolf far born from this line. They found Rome. And just like that, myth becomes history's sketchpad, period. It's all connected. One family's vengeance fuels another's empire. One goddess's apple leads to cities burned and kingdoms born. Myth isn't just entertainment, it's how ancient people explain the impossible, period. Why lightning strikes, why bad things happen to good people, Why you sometimes feel like your bathtub is cursed. Of course, modern historians try to tease fact from fiction, period. Some argue Orestes was a symbol of figure representing the transformation of Greek society, from tribal justice to civic law. Others think he might have been a very old local deity, absorbed into the myth, period. But there's no definitive answer. Just layers, and layers of story, passed down like lullabies wrapped in shadows. And you, still listening, still drifting. You're part of this too, period. You carry these stories in your memory now, tangled up with your own dreams. That's the strange power of myth, it sticks, period. Even when you don't mean it to. You're still with me good, or at least, some peaceful, sleepier version of you is. Maybe you're half floating now, drifting sideways through story and time, where every whisper of myth sounds a little more like a breeze, a little less like a bedtime lecture. Don't worry, this part is more dreamscape than bloodbath, mostly. Because now, we sail away from Greece, not far, not for long, just across the wind-dark sea to a place where legends take a Latin twist. Tonight, you follow the last thread of a doomed war and enter the murky border between myth and empire. This is the age of survivors and the ultimate survivor of the Trojan War. That would be Aeneas. Yes, that same Aeneas who escaped burning Troy carrying his father on his back and his son at his side. The very model of ancient dad energy you've seen Greek heroes slash, scream, and swagger their way through myth. Aeneas, he broods. He obeys the gods. He listens. He's basically the sensitive poet version of a demigod, if Achilles is a firework. Aeneas is a long, slow-burning candle. And believe it or not, Rome will owe everything to him. Aeneas' journey after Troy is told in the Aeneid, a Latin epic poem by the Roman poet Virgil. And here's your historical anchor. Virgil wrote it between 29 and 19 BCE, under the rule of Emperor Augustus. The Aeneid wasn't just poetry, it was national propaganda. A bedtime story for an empire. Through Aeneas, Rome could trace its destiny back to divine origins. Forget rough beginnings, they had chosen people energy. But it's not just smooth sailing. Far from it. Aeneas' journey mimics Odysseus' in a strange shadow play. He too wanders the Mediterranean. He too visits odd islands, meets monsters, and endures storms sent by angry gods. But unlike Odysseus, who just wants to get home, Aeneas doesn't have a home. He's looking to build one, to fulfill a prophecy, and, of course, to suffer poetically. You eventually find yourself on the shores of Carthage, a North African city ruled by Queen Dido. She's clever, powerful, gorgeous, and probably doesn't need a mysterious war refugee with divine daddy issues rolling up on her. But fate has other plans. Thanks to a few strategic nudges from Venus, Aeneas' mother, and Cupid doing his thing, Dido falls for Aeneas. Their love story is lush, slow, and a little tragic from the start. They build a beautiful relationship, but Aeneas is still listening to the gods. Jupiter reminds him he's not here to start a family picnic. He's destined to found a new kingdom in Italy. And so, one night, Aeneas sails away, leaving Dido behind. Cue one of the most haunting scenes in classical literature. Dido, heartbroken, watches the ships vanish into the mist, curses Aeneas, and climbs onto a pyre. She dies by her own hand, but not before promising eternal hatred between Carthage and Rome. You don't have to squint to see the foreshadowing. This is how ancient Romans explained their long, brutal wars with Carthage. Yes, the same conflict that gave rise to Hannibal crossing the Alps with war elephants. All because a goddess made the people fall in love, and one of them ghosted. Quirky tidbit time. There's an alternate. French tradition probably whispered by storytellers in smoky taverns that says Aeneas did love Dido and planned to stay, but the gods forced him to leave. In those versions, he watches her pyre from the ship and cries, which is, more emotionally honest than, well, gotta fulfill my destiny. Historians still argue whether the Aeneid was meant to fully glorify Rome or subtly criticize it. After all, Aeneas causes a lot of pain in the name of duty. He's noble, yes, but he's also cold when it counts, and unlike Homer's heroes, his victories feel heavier, less joyful. Some scholars think Virgil was wrestling with what it meant to build an empire who gets crushed along the way, and whether destiny is ever truly kind. Back to Aeneas. After more wandering, he finally reaches Italy and tries to settle. But of course, there's already people living there because one is discovering a land. Not meant showing up uninvited, he has to fight local kings, especially a warrior named Turnus, who becomes the final obstacle between Aeneas and his fate. In the final moments of the Aeneid, Aeneas defeats Turnus in single combat. Turnus begs for mercy, and Aeneas hesitates, then kills him anyway, cold, unflinching, not heroic in the glittering Homeric way but efficient, Roman, empire ready. From there, his descendants take over the story. His son Ascanius founds Alba Longa, and many generations later come the twin brothers Romulus and Remus. They'll found Rome, according to myth, on the very spot where a she-wolf nursed them after they were abandoned. History, wild and symbolic, rolls onward, and so the golden apple, hurled by Eris, starts to bear fruit not just in war but in empire. The web stretches far, from Mount Olympus to Troy, from Troy to Carthage, from Carthage to Rome. Mythological butterfly effects. If butterflies wore bronze armor and carried shields with snakes on them, you're probably wondering, does any of this really matter now? Well, here's something to curl your toes around under the blanket. Ancient Roman generals like Julius Caesar claimed descent from Aeneas. It wasn't just bedtime mythology, it was a resume builder. Oh, you're just a politician? Well, my great-granddad was a demigod who fled a flaming city on his back. Stories shape identity, and the myth of Aeneas gave the Roman Empire a sacred backbone. It told Romans they were destined to rule. That suffering and sacrifice were justified by a higher plan. You may or may not buy it, but the story is still echoing today, in architecture, in politics, in poetry. And you, dream drunk as you are now, floating between past and pillow, might even feel a tiny tug of the ancient current. You've traveled with Aeneas. You've seen cities rise from ruin. You've watched queens burn and heroes cry and gods play dice with human hearts. It's okay if you forget the details. It's the weight of the myth that stays with you, the slow rhythm of ancient footsteps through your dreams. You're still adrift on this tide of gods and ghosts, right where you should be half asleep, half listening, and entirely safe in the folds of a story older than memory. We've followed the thread from Eris's golden apple through Troy's fall and Rome's rise. But the web stretches farther still, because myth doesn't just stick to marble temples or battlefield ruins. It seeps into daily life, into rituals, into how people name their children or pick their crops, and sometimes into the stars themselves. Tonight, you drift upward now slowly, gently into the constellations, because some of the greatest myths didn't end on Earth. The gods like to commemorate drama by pinning people in the sky like cosmic fridge magnets. If you ever wondered why some clusters of stars are named after mortals with very bad luck, well, buckle up, or rather, unbuckle. You're in sleep mode. One myth made immortal this way is the tale of Orion. You float gently into his story now, like a feather caught in soft wind. Orion was a giant, a hunter, possibly born from a bullhide miracle, don't ask. Myths are notoriously fuzzy on the logistics of conception. Some versions say he was the son of Poseidon, which would explain why he could walk on water. A useful skill, especially during those awkward oops, I drop my spear in the sea moments. Orion was handsome, arrogant, and pretty good with a bow. You know the type. He boasted that he could kill every animal on Earth, which, as you may imagine, did not sit well with Gaia, the Earth herself. So she sent a giant scorpion to take him out. Moral of the story, don't mess with Mother Nature. Quirky tidbit, in some fringe versions of the myth, Orion is blinded for trying to seduce a king's daughter and has to follow the sound of the sun's chariot to regain his sight, which is kind of like a divine exam meets a Greek road trip movie, eventually. Orion dies how exactly depends on the version you hear. Maybe it was the scorpion. Maybe Artemis shot him by accident. Maybe Apollo tricked her into doing it. Either way, he dies. And the gods, feeling sentimental or maybe just feeling theatrical, set him in the stars. Today, you know him as the constellation Orion, forever chasing the Pleiades across the night sky. Historians still argue whether Orion was originally a fertility god or a composite hero, born from multiple regional stories. His legend doesn't tie neatly into one timeline. Like so much mythology, he is a blur famous enough to be pinned in the heavens, but murky at the edges. And speaking of the Pleiades, they're a sister act. 7 daughters of the Titan Atlas and the sea nymph Pleione. According to myth, Orion fell in love with them and chased them relentlessly. Zeus, tired of the whole soap opera, turned them into stars to protect them. Which, when you think about it, is basically the mythological version of putting a restraining order into the sky. If you've ever looked up and spotted those tight little sparkles near Taurus, that's them, the 7 sisters, except only 6 are easily visible to the naked eye. And yes, there are legends about that too. Maybe one sister fell in love with a mortal and faded. Maybe she just got shy. Or maybe cosmic plot twist, the ancient Greeks knew about star brightness variability before NASA ever got around to it. These myths were bedtime stories for ancient sailors. When you couldn't afford to mess up your bearings, you learn your constellations as if your life depended on them, because it did. Orion, the Pleiades, Scorpius, the sky became a kind of mythological GPS. And the stories helped people remember not just where the stars were, but what those stars meant. You weren't just crossing the sea, you were sailing between the legends. You continue floating, higher now, as if your dreams are pressing your soul gently toward the firmament. Other characters join you in the sky. Cassiopeia, queen of vanity, punished to sit in her celestial chair spinning in a lopsided circle every night. Perseus, sword raised forever. And Andromeda, chained to the rock even in the stars. There's drama up there. Eternal, slow-motion drama. Which brings you to a wider thought. Don't worry. It won't be too sharp for sleepy brains. Think about how ancient people saw the heavens, not just as space, but as story. Not cold, dead stars, but gods and monsters and fate frozen in place. It made the world feel connected. What happened below echoed above. And maybe that's the secret of myths. Not that they're true in the factual sense, but that they gave people a way to feel like they belonged in the cosmos. You weren't just a grain of sand. You were a piece of something grand and messy and magical. You could look up and see your story written in light. That's why, even long after the gods faded and temples crumbled, people still whispered these tales. Because the stars didn't stop shining, and neither did the need to explain them. There's one last whisper here, as you drift past the constellation of Pegasus, the winged horse. Born from Medusa's blood when Perseus lopped off her head, Pegasus flies free. A myth born from violence, yes, but remembered for beauty. That's mythology for you. Sharp edges, soft silhouettes. You pass these figures now like floating past sculptures in a gallery of dreams, and the hush of the night wraps tighter around your thoughts. You started with a golden apple tossed into a wedding feast. You watched it spark wars and empires, twist fates, and lift mortals into legend. And now, you're drifting among the stars those same mortals became. Not too bad for a bedtime story, right? You hover gently now, still drifting through the velvety sky stitched with stories. The stars glow softly beneath you, and their tales are nearly endless. But eventually, like every myth, we are downward again back to Earth, where people still whisper the names of gods long gone. Their echoes etched into ruins and language, into festivals and phrases, into the very way you think about right and wrong, glory and shame. Because here's the truth nestled among the olive trees and broken columns. Greek myths didn't fade away. They adapted. They sneaked into Roman culture like trickster Hermes in a borrowed cloak, rebranded and repackaged. You might even say the Romans plagiarized the Greek pantheon, but, in Latin, So let's follow the thread down into the Roman Empire, where everything was a little more organized, a little more militarized, and a whole lot more about imperial propaganda. The Greek gods got new names. Zeus became Jupiter, Hera became Juno, Mars turned into Mars. Same drama, new marble busts, and that golden apple. Its legacy didn't stop at Troy. The idea that petty jealousy among divine beings could rewrite the course of history that stuck around. In fact, the Romans embraced it like a politician clinging to a good scandal. Mainstream historians agree that much of Roman mythology was borrowed wholesale from Greek sources, especially after Rome conquered Greek territories. But what the Romans did best was institutionalize the myth. They turned stories into statecraft. Jupiter wasn't just a storm god, he became the official protector of Rome. Mars wasn't just the god of war, he was the divine father of Romulus and Remus, the mythical founders of the city. And that's where your dreamy focus shifts to those wolf-nurse twins. You float down toward the Tiber River, where the legend begins with a princess forced into a vow of chastity, a war god who ignores it, and twin sons abandoned in a basket. No, not Moses style, this is Rome's origin story, and it's got fans. Romulus and Remus are the sons of Mars and Rhea Silvia. They're tossed into the river by a jealous king, saved by a she-wolf because, of course, why not? And eventually grow up to found a city, but not together. They argue, as siblings do, and then Romulus kills Remus, and a burst of brotherly bonding gone terribly wrong. Rome is born with a little fratricide for flair. Quirky tidbit, the cave where the she-wolf allegedly suckled the twins is called the Lupercal. And every year Romans celebrated Lupercalia, fertility festival that, believe it or not, involved men in loincloths whipping women with strips of goat hide for good luck. Historians still argue whether this was symbolic or just ancient frat boy energy. You drift past scenes of these celebrations, tambourines rattling, laughter echoing through ancient stone arches, and you realize how thin the line is between myth and ritual, between bedtime stories and the actual events people lived and died for. Because in Rome, mythology wasn't just bedtime fluff. It was power. It was identity. Emperors claimed divine ancestry. Julius Caesar said he was descended from Venus herself. The golden apple of Eris may have started in the hands of goddesses, but its spirit was alive and well in Senate chambers, gladiator games, and the imperial cult. And speaking of Venus, you float past her now, lounging eternally in every mosaic and marble, goddess of love and beauty, rival of Juno, and Roman doppelganger of Aphrodite. She's less tempestuous here, a little more polished, less chaos, more courtly charm. But don't be fooled. The same divine spark lives in her, she still leaves trails of ruined cities and broken hearts in her wake. Roman poets like Virgil and Ovid took the chaotic rawness of Greek myth and shaped it into refined epics. The Aeneid, for instance, tells the story of Aeneas, Trojan survivor, son of Venus, founder of what would become Rome. A perfect blend of myth and nationalism. Aeneas carries his father on his back, leads his people across seas, and eventually lands in Italy, where he's destined to build a new empire. Convenient, right? But within all this glorious destiny lies sorrow. 2. Remember Dido, queen of Carthage. She and Aeneas fall in love, but when the gods call him to leave, he ghosts her, literally sails away. She builds a funeral pyre, curses his descendants, and ends her life in flames. Historians still argue whether Virgil intended Dido's curse to foreshadow the later Punic Wars between Rome and Carthage, or whether he just needed a dramatic exit for the love subplot. And once again, you see it, the golden thread of divine meddling and mortal tragedy stretching forward. From the spiteful apple tossed at a divine wedding, to Dido's burning pyre, to the bloody battles of empire. The stories evolve, but the bones remain. You glide now past Roman temples, past triumphal arches etched with battle scenes and gods in flight, past marketplaces where traders haggle beneath statues of Mercury, god of commerce, past homes with little shrines to household deities, because even ordinary Romans needed their own tiny myths to get through the day. And though the Greek names have faded, the themes remain hauntingly familiar. Love versus duty, pride versus humility, chaos versus control. The struggle to find meaning in forces beyond your grasp, even today. When you hear the word narcissist, you're echoing the story of Narcissus, the beautiful boy who loved his reflection too much. When someone says Pandora's box, they're invoking a tale of curiosity and unintended consequences. These stories live in your language, your metaphors, your subconscious fears and dreams. You exhale slowly, your breath feathering into the cool Roman dusk, and you realize you've never really left the myths behind. They're stitched into everything. You wear them without noticing, like invisible laurels. Like ghostly togas draped around your shoulders, the Romans took those myths, polished them with marble and pageantry, and handed them down across centuries. You're still holding them, even now, even here. And so you float onward closer to the fall of empires, to the slow fading of gods. But not quite yet. You drift now toward twilight, not just in the sky above Rome, but in the stories themselves. The empire still pulses beneath you, but its breath is slowing. The statues crack, the temples crumble, and the gods, those marble immortals, begin to fall silent. But not because they have been defeated. No, you begin to see another kind of myth forming beneath them. One that starts not in Olympus or Mount Ida, but in quiet caves, in secret catacombs, and whispers between frightened voices. Because something is changing. You float past a flickering oil lamp and a hidden chamber beneath the streets. A fish symbol scratched into stone. A name whispered, not shouted. A carpenter from Nazareth, nailed to a Roman cross, now seen as a divine savior. You're watching the rise of Christianity amidst the some, a truth to others, but undeniably one of history's most sweeping transformations. And with it comes a great shifting of the mythological tide. Zeus, Hera, Athena, they begin to lose their footing, not all at once, and not without protest, but slowly. They become stories rather than scriptures. The golden apple is replaced with a serpent in a garden, Prometheus with Christ, Mount Olympus with heaven. Mainstream historians note that as Christianity spread through the empire, especially after Emperor Constantine legalized and later adopted it, the old gods weren't violently overthrown so much as gradually retired. Their temples were repurposed, their festivals rebranded. Saturnalia becomes Christmas. The spring rites of Persephone and Demeter morph into Easter themes. Quirky tidbit: many early Christians believed the Greek gods were actually demons, fallen angels in disguise. It was their way of explaining why those deities had so much sway over the ancient world. A kind of theological spin move. You float through this transition now, watching statues of Athena covered with dust, altars to Apollo left barren, while candlelight flickers before simple wooden crosses. The gods don't vanish overnight, they just get quieter. They lose the audience. The drama shifts, and yet listen. If you tilt your head just right, you can still hear the echoes. Because even as the mythological framework changes, the human desire to tell stories about the cosmos remains. And not just stories about gods and monsters, but about choices, pride, mercy, temptation, sacrifice. In fact, historians still argue whether Christianity succeeded partly because it offered a myth that was strangely familiar, an all-powerful father figure, a miraculous birth, a divine son who suffers and rises again, not too different from Dionysus or Osiris in Egypt, or yes, even some tales of Hercules. You float now through medieval monasteries where Greek and Roman texts are copied, translated, preserved by candlelight. The myths are no longer part of religion, but they're still studied, admired. They become literature. They move from sacred to symbolic. They grow teeth again, but different ones, philosophical ones, metaphorical ones. Even as Europe marches into the shadowy centuries, the old stories smolder like embers. In universities, in sculptures, in tapestries woven with the thread of Helen's beauty and Achilles' rage. And then, the Renaissance, You pause now over Florence. The year is 1500-ish. The plague has passed mostly. The churches are rich, the artists are caffeinated, and the myths, they explode back to life. But not as worship, as art. You hover beside Botticelli as he paints the birth of Venus, the goddess rising from the sea on a scalloped shell, like foam-made flesh. You peek into Michelangelo's sketches gods beside saints. Anatomy so divine it could only come from Olympus. You hear the philosophers rereading Plato, Aristotle, and yes, even Homer, because the Renaissance was, in many ways, a giant nostalgic throwback to Greek ideals. The balance, the beauty, the drama. But now, instead of lighting candles to Zeus, people were admiring him in marble. Myths had been safely declawed. They were now academic. Quirky aside, some popes during the Renaissance had mythological murals on their palace ceilings. Scandalous. Maybe, but you know art. You drift gently now over printing presses churning out cheap copies of the Iliad, the Odyssey, the Metamorphoses. These tales move from monks to merchants, from Latin scholars to curious teenagers sneaking them under their blankets. They become entertainment again. And isn't that full circle? The stories that once shaped empires now tucked into bedtime still. Historians debate whether Renaissance thinkers truly believed in the wisdom of the myths, or were just drawn to their aesthetics, their nymphs and laurels and tragic flair. Either way, the myths survived. They shape Western art, education, even your Disney cube. Speaking of which, let's jump ahead, shall we? You soar through steamships and telegrams, through wars and revolutions, until you arrive plop on a modern couch. You're watching a movie trailer. It's epic. It's loud. There's a guy with a lightning bolt, another with winged sandals, a woman with a golden lasso. Yep, Greek mythology has gone Hollywood. From Harryhausen stop-motion skeletons to Percy Jackson's magical boarding school, the gods have had more reboots than Spider-Man. And why not? They're built for drama, jealousy, romance, betrayal, redemption. It's all there. But even now, amid the CGI and popcorn, those old questions echo. What makes someone a hero? What's the price of beauty? Is destiny real, or just a story we tell ourselves? You sink back into your soft mental armchair, letting the scenes flicker past. From Zeus bellowing atop Olympus to Hades with glowing red eyes and a smoky voiceover. Sure, it's all a little ridiculous, but isn't that the point? The golden apple that once rolled across Mount Ida now sparkles on a movie poster. The wooden horse stands proud in a souvenir shop. And somewhere, even now, a kid is reading about Helen and Paris and wondering, would I have launched those ships? Because deep down, the myths didn't just shape history. They shaped you, the questions you ask, the metaphors you use, the way you explain things when there's no spreadsheet to back it up. Myth isn't what people used to believe. It's what people still need a way to dream, to explain, to connect. So don't be surprised if the next time you stub your toe, you blame a mischievous little god. Or when your computer crashes, you mutter, Mercury must be in retrograde. Technically Roman, but you get it. The myths are everywhere, still breathing, still evolving, just like you. The fire has dimmed now. You sit amid its glowing embers, letting the heat of 1,000 stories slowly warm your thoughts. But the journey's not over, not yet, because even though the Greek myths have traveled from sacred altar to glossy streaming screen, they still live and grow in strange little corners of the modern world. And tonight, you're about to peek into those corners. You step quietly into a classroom. There's a 7th grader doodling Zeus on his notebook, complete with a man bun and aviators. His class is reading the Odyssey well, an abridged version, but the spark is there. You remember what it's like to meet a myth for the first time, to stumble across a cyclops and think, what is the thing doing with a giant sheep? The teacher overcaffeinated and underpaid asks what the sirens might symbolize. Someone in the back says, distraction. Someone else whispers, temptation. And just like that, Homer's sea becomes their own. That's the thing with these stories, they're like mirrors. Or maybe funhouse mirrors. Twisted, exaggerated, but somehow still you. Mainstream scholars continue to note that Greek mythology remains a staple in global education because it hits that sweet spot between cultural heritage and psychological depth. The myths are accessible, full of action and drama, but they also pose big questions. They're portable philosophy, disguised as bedtime fables, quirky classroom tidbit. Some modern schools use the Odyssey to teach personal goal setting. What's your Ithaca? They ask, what monsters block your path? And you smile. Because honestly, there's something comforting about rebranding a failed group project as your journey through Scylla and Charybdis. But it's not just classrooms. You wander next into a therapist's office. Someone lies back on the couch, talking about their anger, their shame, their tendency to push people away before they can leave. And the therapist gently says, that sounds a lot like Achilles. Wait, therapy? Yeah, you heard right. Mythology has crept its way into psychology too. Carl Jung famously used Greek archetypes: the hero, the shadow, the mother, to map the human psyche. Joseph Campbell built on that, crafting the hero's journey that now powers every Star Wars plot ever. So while the names may fade, the patterns remain. You're still acting out Prometheus when you take a bold risk. Still channeling Hera when jealousy rears its head. Still feeling like poor Icarus every time your ambitions burn a little too bright. Historians still debate whether these archetypes are culturally ingrained or biologically hardwired. But whatever the answer, you can't deny their staying power. You glide now into a bookshop. The mythology section isn't huge, but it's there. Some glossy hardcovers, a few illustrated guides, a reimagining of Medusa as a misunderstood feminist icon, a retelling of Hades and Persephone as a slow-burn romance with texting and boundary issues. And no, it's not just Greek gods, but make it hot. Well, sometimes it is, but mostly, it's this: a hunger for stories that aren't clean or simple or tied up with a bow. A hunger for characters who are both divine and deeply flawed, like you, like all of us. And while we're here, let's have a fun aside. Did you know there's an entire online subculture dedicated to sorting Greek gods into Hogwarts houses? Spoiler: Hades is always Slytherin. Zeus is usually a Gryffindor, though some argue he's more of a chaotic neutral Ravenclaw. These arguments can and do last for hours. The myths live on, not in temples, but in comment sections. Then there's the fashion world. Yes, you heard that right. You float over a runway. The music pulses. The lights are dramatic. And here comes a model in a toga-inspired gown, glittering like Aphrodite's reflection. Another glides by in black feathers, a clear nod to Nyx, the goddess of night. Designers love Greek myth, its elegance, its symbolism, its ability to scream "I am timeless" without a word. And let's not forget tattoos. Oh yes, people etch Athena's owl, Hermes' caduceus, or Poseidon's trident right into their skin, not because they pray to those gods, but because they identify with them. They feel seen, represented, empowered. You pause now beside a street mural in New York. Its Artemis modernized with sneakers and a hoodie, bow drawn against a glowing moon. Below it, someone has scribbled, "Still hunting." And suddenly, you realize the gods never really left. They just adapted, like good characters do. They slipped into language. Pandora's box, Herculean task, Achilles' heel. They nestled into brand names: Nike, Amazon, Titan. Go ahead, try to unsee that. They became metaphors so familiar, you barely notice them anymore. Even science borrows their names. You glance at the sky, there's Jupiter, Mars, Neptune, still shining above us. We name moons after Io and Callisto, probe space with the Artemis program, study the Higgs boson, nicknamed the God particle. It's a funny twist, isn't it? That the more we learn, the more we name things using the oldest stories we have. As if progress and myth aren't opposites but companions. Scholars sometimes argue that myth isn't about believing something happened, it's about feeling. Something is true, not factual, but resonant, eternal. And you're still walking among myths. Even now, you follow their footprints through the books you read, the dreams you chase, the metaphors you use when logic runs dry. So don't be surprised if the next time life gets chaotic, you imagine a golden apple rolling into your day. Or when you're faced with a tough decision, you ask yourself, what would Athena do? That's the beauty of myth. It meets you where you are, whether that's on a battlefield, a therapist's couch, or aisle 6 of a grocery store while trying to decide between oat milk and cow. And with that thought, your eyelids grow heavier, your breath steadies. But there's still a little more story left in you, isn't there? You're almost there now, at the quiet tail of this mythic marathon. The embers of Troy are just distant smoke. The gods have wandered back into their constellations, and your feet carry you into the soft dust of time's backstage. But one last character remains. Not a god, not a hero. A face that rarely makes the front cover of myths. Tonight, you meet the storytellers. You picture a hunched old figure sitting by a fire in some windswept Aegean village. Their voice low, thick with smoke and sea salt. Spinning tales pass from memory to memory long before they ever touched papyrus. This was the original internet, oral tradition. One person speaking while others listen, eyes wide, mouths full of honey cakes and disbelief. See, the myths weren't born perfect. They were told, retold, broken, mended, and reimagined. That's how Homer himself likely operated, less best-selling author. More traveling narrator with a lyre, a voice, and the uncanny ability to keep an audience awake without CGI explosions. Mainstream historians agree that early Greek myths began as local folk tales, sometimes rooted in real places or distorted accounts of natural disasters. The eruption of Thera, for instance, may have seeded the tale of Atlantis. And right here, historians still debate, did Homer actually exist? Was he a single man, or a composite of name wrapped around a whole guild of poets, whose collective genius got stuffed into one convenient figure? Some say yes, others shrug and say, does it matter? Because the magic isn't in the author, it's in the telling. And you have become part of the telling just by listening. Every time you reimagine a myth, mention a Trojan horse during a cybersecurity rant, or call something your Achilles heel, you're keeping the oral tradition alive. You're one more storyteller. You drift now into the less lit corridors of mythology, the ones they don't always teach in school, the footnotes and half-forgotten variants, like the version of the Trojan horse where the Greeks didn't sneak out. That's the thing with myths, they bend to fit the teller's mood. They're alive. One culture's hero is another's villain. One poet's joke is another's sacred truth. In some versions, Helen never even goes to Troy. You walk through a museum now. Cool marble, hushed steps, statues half cracked, eyes blank with time. And you realize they weren't built to last. Not really. The ancients knew marble weathers. One museum curator once joked that they spend half their time correcting mislabeled gods. That's not Apollo, it's just a really buff poet with bad hair. And you laugh, quietly, because myth always walks the line. Take Heracles, for instance, often portrayed as the ultimate man's man. Muscles, lion skin, club. But in some lesser-known myths, he's a cross-dresser, forced to wear a dress and do spinning at the feet of a queen. Modern scholars have begun reinterpreting these myths through queer, feminist, and post-colonial lenses, not to change the myths but to unearth the meanings that were always there, just hidden behind the marble curtain. You pass a child now, curled up with a book. The cover reads Percy Jackson. And he's reading aloud to his little sister, and then the Minotaur charged. He says, eyes wide. The sister squeals, delighted. Let's pull one more odd detail from the vault. Did you know ancient Greek temples had sound design? Seriously, the architects placed certain columns and chamber curves so the priest's voice would echo dramatically across the room. There's beauty in that level of intention, and how myth and architecture, story and stone, were woven together, every part designed to awe, to teach, to pull you out of yourself and into something bigger. And that's really what myth does. It takes your ordinary, complicated, disappointing little life and frames it inside something timeless. You aren't just someone with a deadline, you're Odysseus, navigating monsters and tempests. You sit now beneath a tree, one older than you'll ever be. You're quiet. The world is quiet. And you think maybe all of this, the gods, the apples, the wars and prophecies, weren't about them at all. Maybe they were always about us. And now, with the firelight of myth flickering lower, you arrive at the doorstep of endings not the kind sung by choirs, or written in blood across marble walls, but the softer, stranger endings that myths rarely get. What happened after the fall of Troy? The city is ash and smoke now. The mighty walls that held for 10 years have cracked like eggshells. You stand amid the rubble, listening not to screams or clashing swords, but to the slow breath of aftermath. The war is over, but the story isn't. Your old friends are scattered. Odysseus hasn't even made it home yet. He's still battling sea monsters and ego. Menelaus gets Helen back again, and depending on the source, either forgives her or just sighs a lot and never mentions it. Agamemnon sails home to find his wife Clytemnestra has plans. Spoiler alert, not the welcome party he hoped for. And Aeneas, the Trojan prince who somehow survived, he takes a different path entirely, wandering west with his father on his back and a new destiny in his pockets. His tale becomes the Aeneid, a Roman sequel to a Greek tragedy. One empire falls, another rises, circle of myth. Historians agree that the ruins of Troy do exist, buried beneath layers of dirt in modern-day Turkey. Heinrich Schliemann, that lovable rogue of archaeology, claimed to have found it in the 1870s. He also might have dynamited through half of it. Oops. You can still visit. If you want, just don't expect golden helmets or statues of gods. Mostly dust. Dust. And the stubborn idea that here, somewhere, men once fought for glory or love, or because they didn't want to admit the whole thing had gotten out of hand. Quirkier tidbit. There's a lesser-known version of the myth where the Trojan horse doesn't even work. The Trojans spot it, set it on fire, and the Greeks inside roast like chestnuts. So much for strategy. But most stories give you the version you know. The Greeks sneak in, Troy burns, and everyone either dies, wanders off, or writes a poem about it. Still, historians and mythologists continue to argue. What was the real cause of the Trojan War? Was it Helen's abduction? A trade dispute? An allegory for solar cycles, as one particularly fringe theory suggests? Or was it just a story meant to warn against pride and the dangerous charm of beautiful things? You walk the scorched roads where Troy once stood, and something odd catches your eye. A small vine creeping up a collapsed pillar, new growth from old stone. And you think, even this destruction, grief, loss is not the end in the ancient world. Myths didn't just stop, they echoed. Heroes reappeared in different cities under new names. Gods shape-shifted into foreign deities. The line between one story and the next was porous. It still is. The Marvel Cinematic Universe owes its entire existence to the flexibility of Greek mythology. Though admittedly, no one ever cast Danny DeVito as Zeus, which feels like a missed opportunity. Back in the ruins, a child picks up a piece of broken pottery. It's painted with a horse. Maybe it once belonged to someone who survived. Maybe it's nothing. But you imagine the child running home, holding the sword-like treasure, and whispering stories of heroes who fell from fire and rose into legend. And maybe that's how myths are born again. You picture Odysseus at last returning to Ithaca, older, rougher, his home unchanged, but also not the same. Penelope waits. His dog, old and blind, dies at his feet out of pure loyal exhaustion. And you feel the bittersweet thing myths rarely say aloud. Going home is sometimes harder than going to war. You keep walking. Night deepens. The stars above Greece spin slowly in their celestial circuits. Constellations named for heroes, monsters, punishments: Orion, Andromeda, Cassiopeia. The sky itself is a story. And you realize someone once named those stars, chose to remember, not forget. Another fringe theory floats up like a dream. What if the Trojan horse wasn't a literal horse at all? but a misunderstood symbol, a metaphor for an earthquake, or a ship named Horse used to sneak men into the city under cover of darkness. Some scholars argue this, others roll their eyes. The thing is, myths don't need truth to be true. You now sit at the edge of the sea. It smells of salt and time. You feel the cool spray on your face as small waves lap the shore. The same sea Homer sang of. The same sea Helen once crossed, willingly or not. The same sea the gods pretended to rule but secretly feared. And you, here in this quiet moment, are part of the same endless ripple. Just one more soul rock to sleep by the wash of story and tide. You think about what we keep and what we let go. Troy burned, but its name endures. Achilles died, but his name became a metaphor for vulnerability. And the apple? Well, apples are still thrown. Maybe not by goddesses anymore, but you've definitely seen office gossip ignite over something smaller. So you close your eyes. You imagine a golden apple glinting in the dust, left behind after all the gods have gone, not because it caused a war, but because it asked a question. Who deserves to be remembered? You smile, because you know the answer is always the one who listens. You linger there, on the edge of that imagined sea, where myths slip into the quiet spaces between sleep and story. The golden apple has rolled out of sight. The gods have returned to wherever gods go when nobody believes in them anymore. And you're still here. You've made it through 10 years of war, betrayals, awkward divine interventions, and even a few possibly metaphorical horses. Now, let's tie it all together softly, gently. Remember Eris, the goddess of discord, who started all this by tossing a single apple with a petty little message. It's almost laughable now. How much chaos bloomed from something so small. And yet, don't you know a few modern day Erises? The office pot stirrers, the group chat bomb droppers. Some things never change. But deeper down, this myth wasn't really about Helen or gods or war. It was about choices made by gods who should have known better, mortals who didn't, and fate, always lurking like a sleep-deprived scheduler, trying to keep the divine calendar from falling apart. You may also recall Cassandra, the Trojan prophetess cursed to see the future but never be believed. That's heartbreak disguised as magic. Her story fades into the background of the war, but it lingers because we've all had moments where we saw a disaster coming and nobody listened. Maybe that's why myths survive. They feel familiar. We find ourselves inside them, like echoes passed down from generations of very tired, very imaginative humans. And now, here's a scholarly tidbit to drift off with. Historians still argue whether the Trojan War was a single historical event or a composite of many smaller conflicts, stitched together into one grand tale. Some even wonder if Troy was a title, not a place, like king, but for cities. On the quirkier side, there's a fringe theory one that probably deserves its own soft chuckle that Paris wasn't even a prince, but a pirate, a seafaring rogue who kidnapped noble women for ransom. So basically, mythological Tinder, but with fewer swipe rights and more sword fights. But perhaps the most surprising detail is how utterly human it all is. The gods meddle and sulk and play favorites. The heroes bicker and boast. And even the villains have backstories that make you wince a little. You wouldn't trust Agamemnon with your cat, but you might still see glimpses of his ambition in some boardroom CEO. Achilles might have been invincible, but emotionally, paper thin. Paris, well, he had one job. Don't make enemies of 3 jealous goddesses. And he blew it spectacularly. And as for Helen, the face that launched 1,000 ships, maybe she was a victim. Maybe a villain. Maybe just a woman trying to survive in a world where her beauty was treated like a weapon. Some versions say she regretted everything. Others suggest she was never in Troy at all. But a phantom? A trick? Historians debate it. Poets just shrug and write sonnets. Because in the end, myths aren't meant to be clear. They're meant to shimmer and shift, like reflections on water. You reach for meaning, and it slips between your fingers, leaving only that strange, lingering feeling of knowing. And now, With the war long over and the last fires cooling in the rubble, your journey has come to its end. You've walked among gods, watched cities fall, seen love twist into legend, and felt the weight of a single shining apple roll through history like a bowling ball aimed at the world's ankles. There's nothing left to fight, no more names to remember. Only the quiet hush that comes after the last line of a very long, very strange bedtime story. So lean back, let your breath soften. Let the distant sails of Greek ships fade into the dark horizon. Let the moon rise high over the Aegean, painting ruins and waves in silver light. Because you, dreamer, have survived the Trojan War. Now, drift down in the softness, in the silence, into the warm, sleepy dark where no gods shout and no warriors clash. Just the faint whisper of the wind over Troy, and the slow, rhythmic lap of water against an empty shore. You're safe here. The story is over. Now, let everything go. Slack your arms, your jaw, even that stubborn crease between your brows. There's nothing left to figure out. The gods have gone quiet, the heroes have laid down their swords, and even the golden apple has rolled off into the grass, forgotten under a starlit sky. You're lying in your own quiet place now, not unlike those ancient halls of marble and olive trees. Your breathing is slower. Your mind is softening around the edges, like parchment left out in the sun. All those characters, Helen, Achilles, Cassandra, Paris, they're just stories now, folding themselves back into the pages of memory. Their world fades into night as yours drifts toward dreams. Let the last wisps of myth dissolve into the background. Let the crackling fires go still. The drums of war fall silent. The smoke curl gently into nothing. No more prophecies. No more riddles. Just you, here, now. And though your feet once stood in burning Troy, and your heart sailed across wine-dark seas, now you float in calm, rocked gently by a story, held by the softness of breath and rest. Even if you don't remember the details when you wake, that's okay. The lessons will linger like sea salt on skin, quiet and true. The question of who was right, who was wrong, who started it all, it doesn't matter anymore. What matters is this stillness, this softness, this space made just for you. So sleep now. Let the myths close behind you like a gently swinging gate. Let the quiet carry you forward. And when you dream, may you walk in worlds where apples never fall, and war never comes, and every story ends in peace.